Welcome to another episode of CRT Sound System. We're episode 63, and it's the first episode of the new year, actually. Happy New Year, everyone. And
Happy
we're
New Year.
talking,
Yeah.
talking about Dragon Spirit. We've got Reese, as always. Reese, how are you?
Incredible. How are you, Tom?
I'm fantastic. Yeah, had a good New Year, and we've got a guest along to tell us all about the Dragon Spirit. Brian, returning from the Air Force Delta episode, I believe. Yeah, Air Force Delta. That was the one you did with us.
That's correct. Yeah.
How are you, Brian?
I'm doing all right. I mean, it's like you said, whole new year, 2025.
Ah, yeah, absolutely.
They keep happening, despite all my efforts. Yeah, thanks for coming on, Brian.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
No, absolutely.
Any excuse to talk about Namco games.
That's why I made the podcast.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes Namco is overlooked by us a bit in this, and certainly the composer of this game, Shinji Hosoe, who is sort of on balance one of up there in the in the pantheon of great composers, and I feel like I haven't done him enough justice on this podcast, and I'm definitely I have lots of plans to talk about his stuff in the future, but I just haven't gotten around to it. I think the only time he's shown up before on an actual episode was the Tetris episode, because he did the soundtrack for the Tetris Grandmaster games. Okay. But yeah, that's a discussion for later. So Brian, if you want to just tell everyone a little bit about Dragon Spirit, if they're not familiar with it, just the quick rundown will do nicely.
Yeah, of course. It's a vertical shooter, I think is what they call them. From Namco. It was released in arcades. Let me pull up my notes here. I used to have all this memorized, but I don't want to get it wrong. So 1988?
Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah. And,
87, 88 or something like that. Yeah.
And it was released in arcades, and being a vertical shooter, it's similar to things like 1942 and other vertical shooters, but it's much more, I guess I've heard many people describe it as like heavy metal, because you're a dragon flying around blowing up dinosaurs and turtles and phoenixes and stuff.
Yeah, there's definitely that sort of like weird fantasy, like what's the name of that guy? Frank Frazetta, is that his name?
Yeah,
like that kind of style. Yeah, sorry, go on.
I was just gonna say, and then they ended up porting it to pretty much everything that was around at the time. So yeah, like of course the Famicom Nintendo version, but also like we were just looking at the Atari ST, the X68000, which was, I think, was considered like the best home version until the best home version, I think, now is considered one of the Namco museums for like the PlayStation. But
yeah, you'd have to assume so. Yeah.
But yeah, for the longest time, it was that X68000. It was also on the PC Engine or TurboGrafx. It was on everything.
Yeah. So the intro track was from the PC Engine port of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and each version has kind of what do you want to? Well, not each version, but many of the versions have like slightly different soundtracks. And Namco really, even though this is kind of an overlooked franchise, I guess you would call it, Namco really pushed it hard at the time. If you look into it, there are novelizations of it that were released in Japan. It had a manga, a ton of merchandise, all the ports, and then it did get a sequel later on. But then I guess it just, I don't know if it just didn't. Everything I've looked at says it sold really well. I don't know why they just didn't continue doing stuff with it. They do put it in their collections from time to time, but
yeah, I think it's just one of those things that like these style of shooters sort of fell out of favor, sort of in the early 90s, and it's sort of when the shooters started evolving into like your bullet hell style ones. Yeah. And maybe they weren't sort of interested in chasing that dragon, so to speak. But yeah, no, it's a very cool little shooter. The thing that it probably reminds me most of outside of like 1942 is Zevious, and mostly just because of the bombing mechanic. Because like that's there's two styles of those vertical shooters. There's the ones they're just a straight shooter, and they're the ones where you have a secondary button for attacking things that are on the ground. And this is firmly in that second category of shooter.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And as I say, I'm not sure it would have translated well to a sort of a more bullet hell style if they were to continue that style forward. But as for the game itself, like I just did a couple of quick playthroughs of it just to try it out, and I don't. It's not one that I remember playing as a kid in arcades or anything like that. But I know you mentioned, Brian, that it's one that sort of it has been a favorite of yours since you were a kid.
Yeah, for I want to say it was like my third or fourth Christmas, my mom got me a NES, and it was one of the pile of games she got me because it had a dragon on the cover and stuff, and I played it for years before I was able to beat it because like a 3 or 4 year old's not going to be able to beat a shooter game, but eventually I did. But yeah, I for years I played a ton of it, and I loved the look of it, and especially the music, even though it was the NES version, which quality wise is probably the worst version, but the compositions are really good, so they still sound good.
Yeah. That's definitely something we sort of encounter a lot in this when we're sort of, especially like just putting together episodes and stuff, just like where it's sometimes you might lose a bit of quality or lose a bit of fidelity in translating to a less powerful system. But when you've got really strong compositions like this game has, it's that'll almost always sort of carry it through. And you can, especially when you're sort of comparing and contrasting. It's nice to sort of to be able to sort of hear what was originally there, and then sort of hear the interpretation as people were sort of trying to figure out how to do that.
Hey, I feel if like this was just a Nintendo game and wasn't a port of something with much higher fidelity, I feel like people would be like, "Oh, this is a classic, hidden gem." That's kind of my take on it is very true that I don't want to call it lesser, but it's definitely a Nintendo game,
Yeah.
It's not breaking any barriers in terms of the game comparatively, despite some fun little gameplay things.
Yeah. No, I think we'll probably talk a little bit about that gameplay stuff, the gameplay differences later. Because
Awesome.
it's I was not aware of the fact that like it was a different sort of version, but also very much the same game as well.
Yeah,
but yeah, I think when we get to talking about the NES soundtrack in more detail, we'll probably discuss that. But yeah, did you then sort of go on to play the arcade game, Brian, from there,
so
or did you ever sort of encounter it?
Where I grew up, in rural West Texas, there wasn't a whole lot as far as arcades. Like we had a few, but I never actually saw this in the wild. But later on, when I started getting into emulation, of course, I pretty immediately went and played the arcade version and the various other versions. And I know you said we'll talk about gameplay differences later, but it was just going and playing the arcade version for the first time.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the stuff in the NES version is a lot more abstract because they're simple sprites, whereas in the arcade version, for the first time, I was like, oh, I see what these enemies were supposed to be.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely, and I think that's a feeling that maybe is lost on people who are probably of the younger generation, like those of us sort of who are now in our sort of late 30s and early 40s who grew up in arcades or had games on our NES or Genesis or whatever as a kid, and then discovering emulation and being able to sort of discover and sort of explore all the different variations of a game that you loved as a kid, and sort of trying to see sort of how it was different. It's an interesting feeling. I say I don't think that the younger generation really gets that. But yeah, it's cool. So I think we'll jump into some of the first block of tracks here from the arcade version of the game. So as I mentioned, these are all composed by Shinji Hosoe. And it is actually his first game. It's the first game he worked on, as near as I can tell. And it's very different to sort of some of the stuff that he would come later. It's he sort of became more famous later in his career for a very sort of that sub music style. But these are very much in a more traditional video game style, but they're absolutely excellent compositions. So the first track we have is Area 1, then Area 3, Area 4, Area 6, and Area 7. The thing I jumped out to me, and as soon as Reese said it, then I was like, oh yeah, that's what they all do. Is like they all seem to start with this sort of little moment of like preparation before the song itself sort of gets going, and it's
great.
sort of go ahead.
It's great for like when you're playing through it. Like I didn't even get close to beating any of the versions I tried. I'm not good at video games anymore. But anyways, the like when you're starting another life and you're like you know, you're popping in somewhere in the middle of the level, and it's like it feels great. It feels like you're getting shot down the dragon chute back to the level.
Yeah.
I think it's a really really savvy way of making video game tracks. You know, I think, you know, the Mario song is so famous for that, and you know that the composer talks so much about having that little blip that gets you into the song, and I feel like this is almost as effective, if not more, just having the shoot noise, which is what I think of it.
Yeah. A lot of really good shoot 'em up soundtracks, I think, do that at the start of the tracks, just to sort of to give you that little moment of preparation to say, okay, let's get ready, let's go.
Yeah, I think so. Then it ramps up.
Absolutely, yeah. And we were talking about like just the drum fills in the Area 4 track. And it reminded me of something sort of what we were discussing with Boyne in the previous episode about how like one of the really cool things about the music of this time is that like even though it's programmed and even though it's sort of synthesized or whatever, the really good stuff has a feel like somebody is actually playing it. You know, and like adding in those little things like the drum fills and like little bass runs and stuff like that throughout these tracks, it really does. Even though, as I say, it's all synthesized, it's all pre-programmed, it does feel like there's a person who is playing this music, and yeah, it gives it a really good feel to it that I think would be missing if you just did this as straightforwardly as possible.
Absolutely, it's great for video games just because it adds an extra kinetic level to it, and I think it sets it apart just from having it being kind of just tracker music, which, you know, of course is great, and you know that certainly is music that can have variation as well. I just think it's particularly interesting in games when they're able to pull that off, because not easy in this day and age, and in the day and the age of the composition rather. And it's just so effective. It's and wonderful to hear.
Yeah, I agree. I wonder, it probably would have been really neat to actually have found this in an arcade and hear this music and those sound effects and stuff, you know, playing out in an arcade would be neat.
Let me tell you, it ripped. That's my backstory for Dragon Spirit, is that I didn't play any of the ports until way later, until I was building up my emulation collection in college. And so I just kind of knew it as like, oh yeah, the Dragon game, which none of my local arcades had it, so it was kind of like just like a wondrous jewel whenever we would, like, you know, go for whatever reason we were traveling somewhere. I remember it was in a hotel when we were driving to Disney World, and I was just like freaking out that the hotel arcade had Dragon Spirit, and my mom was just like, "Oh, he's so wonderful." Yeah.
The days when like hotels had arcades in them, like that's such a like we even had them in like our dinky little hotel in the smallest town on the west coast of Ireland. Our hotel had a little arcade in it, and like the fact that was there was just like it was so indicative of the time. And as soon as you said the hotel arcade, my brain just sort of, I had one of those Proustian rushes. Like it's just like, oh my god.
No, but you're so right though. It really was the highlight of that little girl's life. Every time we went anywhere that was not an arcade, that had an arcade. Like, it was just like, what does this Italian restaurant have Pac-Man even? It was just like, yes, I win.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
I had
sure.
a memory just now, in fact, of my uncle used to run a hotel out near the golf course where we live. The hotel it's called Dune and Or. For anybody who knows Dingle, they'll probably know of it. But they had it there. The arcade was in like a little shed that was right next to the swimming pool.
Mhm.
And I remember they had Bonanza Brothers and World Heroes Perfect. Those are the two arcades that were in this tiny little set. And I remember just like my uncle opening up the machines for me when they were like because it would close down for winter because there would be no business in the winter. So I'd go out there and my uncle would just open up the arcade for me and just put it into free play mode, and I would just play World Heroes Perfect and Bonanza Brothers over and over again.
Oh, that sounds incredible. That
Yeah,
sounds
that's
like a
awesome.
dream.
Yeah. And I was always like, because, like World Heroes Perfect is not a very well known fighting game. So when I started getting into fighting games properly, and I'd be like, oh yeah, do you remember World Heroes Perfect? And almost nobody would be like, what the fuck? Like everyone was just like, what the fuck is World Heroes Perfect? But that was my shit back in the day. Sorry for the digression.
No, welcome digression. So my vibe encountering Dragon Spirit as a child out in the wild, was that it felt incredibly distinct to me. It might be hard to imagine now, but like fantasy was the most sort of like, I would say, sequestered away genre, even more so than horror. Horror was sort of like, also you weren't supposed to go look at horror, but they still had like it was still like quite popular.
Yeah.
And so like anytime that I encountered something like actual fantasy, that wasn't the fantasy games and stuff I already owned, it felt unique. And I think Dragon Spirit kind of has a pretty unique take on it. It's just looking at the game, you're just kind of a dragon. You got but multiple heads, that's cool. But this guy like turning into a dragon and to rescue the princess. And there's like a bit more of a story. And that's way more in the ports too. But even in um the arcade, there's a bit of a vibe, and then like at the end, you turn into the guy again and embrace her. It felt it felt like narratively distinct from a lot of arcade games. It was just like, oh damn, Pac-Man's hungry. What are we gonna do? Uh, so I would say that I never realized that it was successful. I thought it was quite unsuccessful just because I rarely saw it, and it sort of like felt sort of more of maybe a Japanese thing, but I certainly don't know one way or the other.
And I mean, when I said it was successful, that's taken from Japanese sources. I actually have no idea how well it did in the West.
Mm-hmm.
It was successful in Japan, but um,
Yeah. Well, I think too, maybe it's successful too, and I think maybe the reason it doesn't get put in the collections is just because there's just so fucking much Namco could put in those collections that I have to imagine that even if it got like a big marketing push, like the people, there's a million reasons why it just doesn't resonate to people putting those collections together now.
and it
But
still
it's a compelling.
shows. I was just gonna say it still shows up from time to time. I think the most recent on the Xbox 360. Or no, it's in the Nintendo Switch Namco collection.
Oh, okay, that's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So they still recognize they own it.
Yeah,
But,
I mean, there's so many. There's just absolutely so many Namco games that
yeah,
like
there are.
it's
And so many
I think
shooters and
yeah.
like you were saying, I guess one of the reasons it stands out to me is like during that time, you had to find a fantasy based shooter that wasn't, sci-fi or like World War II or something.
Exactly.
Was pretty neat. I've always gravitated towards those, and I mean, there's a ton now, but back in the day, it was like
Yeah.
this or like Cotton or something.
Yeah.
And certainly no shooters. Like if you were gonna find a fantasy game, it's gonna be like, all right, here's a guy with a sword. Yeah, there's a sexy elf involved. You're just like, oh
Be
yeah,
like
this is fantasy.
golden axe or something.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Golden Axe or Rygar or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. One thing I did sort of when I was looking through the a couple of long plays and stuff as well is just like this game is long as hell. Like,
It is.
you know, like the next block we're going to start off with a track which is like Area 9, which for a shooter I think is insanely long.
Yeah, there is when we get to the version we can bring it up, but on the NES version there is like a caveat to that, which involves that different colored dragon.
Yeah, which I'm interested to talk about that later for sure. Yeah, because I was when I tried the NES version, I was like, "What the hell's happening here?" And I suppose going backwards, then if you were playing the NES version, you were like, "Wait, this isn't right."
I think too that there's a level of complexity to the power ups that isn't like, mind blowing or anything, but I think is above average for a shooter of its era. It's not just like you can pick up more life, or like here's your beam fire and here's your homing fire.
Yeah,
There's you can increase your heads and you can increase your flame power, or you can shrink your dragon, or you can you can have them be different colors for a little while. And I know this is pretty minor, but and maybe some of that's only in the TurboGrafx version. It's hard to tease apart what's in what's version.
I think it's in most or
I
in
think from
all
what
of
I could
them.
tell,
But
the sort of the weapon upgrades were more or less the same throughout them all.
Yeah.
There may have
Well,
been some slight differences,
which,
but they seem to be more or less the same.
as a
yeah.
kid, getting the ones that would make my dragon like 3 heads and green or white and shooting like flamethrower type stuff, I thought that was the best. But as I grew up, I learned the one that shrinks you is actually probably the best, because you have a
It makes you
smaller
less-
hitbox.
yeah.
I was watching Let's Plays, and I was watching like 1cc plays, and none of them were growing their head amounts, which is one of the greatest power ups in terms of feel that I've
Yeah.
ever encountered. But I was like getting mad at them. I was just like, "You're missing the head power up. What's wrong with you? We're trying to 1cc this." And then I had to watch a video that actually explained the small was better. I was like, "Oh, of course, that makes perfect sense." But
Yeah,
still,
because it's not like modern sort of bullet hell shooters where your actual hitbox is pretty much like a pixel in the center of your character. Back in those days, like your entire sprite was usually the hitbox. So yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Being smaller is definitely better in those instances.
Yeah, and it's certainly, it makes the game much easier, especially I think because of those last boss fights. It really seems like you got to kind of like, to get a lot of good hits in, you kind of like have to go to the razor's edge in front of like flying in front of the dragon's mouth or whatever. It felt like the
Yeah.
ice dragon was especially dangerous in terms of trying to access its hitbox. So being fast, being small is way better.
Absolutely. All right, so we'll jump into this next block, which is just another bunch of tracks from the arcade game. So as mentioned, we've got Area 9-3. Sorry, no, first we have Area 8, then Area 9-3, then Boss A, B, C, and D, and then the last track is the last boss theme. I've discovered that there's a version of the Area 1 theme that was used in Smash Brothers.
I was just looking at that.
Wait,
Yeah.
really? How did I miss that?
Yeah, so I am adding that into the playlist at
That's
the end of the last block.
amazing, and I'm upset that I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was just on the Wikipedia page. It's really funny. I really enjoy how sometimes when I'm doing research for something that should be so obvious just completely passes me by.
Which,
when I'm just like, yeah,
Which Smash Brothers is it?
Ultimate.
Oh,
Yeah,
Yeah,
for
it's
one of
it's
Pac-Man
for
stages.
the Pac-Land stage.
Yeah,
No surprise.
no, yeah, it's. Speaking of sort of museums, that's one of my favorite elements of Smash Ultimate. It's just that sort of it feels like just a big old museum to like the original game was sort of one for Nintendo history, but as it's grown, it's really becomes there's sort of like a museum for retro games in a lot of ways in a really cool way. But yeah,
the one of my favorite little pieces of trivia about Dragon Spirit, speaking of museums, is that in the credits they have all the creators, and then it has an incredibly long list of every Namco game up till that point.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
and like the TurboGrafx version has like an updated list of like
Oh,
including like Star Wars, which hadn't come out yet, I think, and the arcade version. It's
very
very
cool.
funny.
I love that.
It's great to just be like, dog, check out all this other great shit we did. Yeah, we did Pac-Man. Just whatever. It's just one of the ones we did.
No
Whatever.
big deal. Yeah. Yeah. The the thing I sort of really enjoyed in the first sort of in that block is just like just sort of shows the diversity of the sound in this game and the sort of a lot of shoot 'em up games sort of tend to go for the very sort of high octane stuff sort of naturally. And I think that works for it, but it's hearing those Area 8 and Area 9 themes, it's nice to sort of imagine these games sort of taking a minute to slow down, especially as they get towards the end, before you get the final boss theme, which in this game absolutely fucking rips ass.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a cool little way to sort of get you settled in, just for that last bit of the game. But yeah, the boss themes, all four of them, excellent. And again, just little like drum breaks and fills and stuff like that throughout them that I think is a really cool. Just sort of again, just a good feel. It helps these things feel like they're that they're sort of being made by a person, and you can really hear in these as well. Just like Shinji Hosoe is an incredibly talented composer, and it's good that he sort of went on to continue doing so many different things. Like he's still making stuff to this day.
I was gonna say, is he the one who also like DJs at clubs and stuff in his?
I think that's
downtime?
Sano. Sano DG, I think is the name of the guy. The like, there's a bunch of the sort of the Namco guys that did they formed Super Sweep, which is their like own record label for their music. But they've also released their own music under their own names, sort of like as solo music, and they have done DJ stuff. But I do think it's one of the other guys in Super Sweep. I don't think it's Hosoe, but it could very well be as well. These guys probably get around a lot.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like you said, I mean, when we did our episode on him, one of the reasons was because at first I was like, I want to do the Dragon Spirit guy, but then we looked and we were like, oh, he's touched so many things, and
Yeah, absolutely.
Like this, he's been in the Street Fighter series, he's been in Xenosaga, like he's done the Nonary games. If you're the kind of sicko who's into those,
Which I am.
They're definitely an upcoming episode because those soundtracks absolutely whip ass. He's done Ridge Racer, Tekken, like so many of the biggest names in sort of games for the last 30 years. This guy has had a hand in, like as I say, he's done soundtracks for Tetris games. Yeah, so
He
it's
did like something in a Mega Man game. I forget what it was. I
yeah.
have to go check, but
Yeah, no, he shows up as a remixer a lot on other soundtracks. So like, quite a lot of his remixes in modern sort of cave shooters and stuff like that as well. So yeah, Mega Man Battle Network I think was one of them that he did. Yeah, but yeah, like if you can think of a series, there's probably something that he's had to do with it at this stage. Sorry, what were you going to say, Reese?
I'm very impressed too that in his sorry brain farting in one of the interviews I read, he made it seem like he kind of snuck his way into becoming a composer as well. Is that he was a graphic designer for Namco and was just kind of like composing on the side, and was just basically was just sort of like just showed up with some music, and he was just like, no, I can do it, I can do it. It seemed like he wanted to do music more. And then would just sort of like bully Namco on the Dragon Spirit. And they're like, no, this rips. Then proceeded to just be, you know, one of the pillars of gaming music.
That's kind of what I remember is he joined as some other position, like related to programming or something, and then was like, hey, I also make music.
Yeah. Back in the days when you could just have a job and then bully your boss into letting you do other work.
And they were like, well, I guess we'll let you work on this little dragon game we're making. I don't know.
Yeah, nobody's going to care about this.
What was great about that interview too is that he was talking about all these different composers and, you know, being very complimentary. And they got to Yuzo Koshiro, and he's just like, that guy is so smart. How does he do it? He's like, okay, he seems like genuinely upset at how smart and good Yuzo Koshiro is. There wasn't even any praise. It was just like, what the fuck, dude?
Fantastic.
But all the rest of his answers was just like, oh, well, what do you do? Like, what's your inspiration? It's like, my inspiration is music. I just live music. It's just like very, very like composer who like barely even thinks in words anymore.
Yeah.
You know, just talking about his influences and what he does, and it's just like clearly this was somebody who was destined to become a composer who found his way in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the next one we're going to go talking about is going to be the TurboGrafx soundtrack. These it's always hard when I'm trying to find information about composers. Like Shinji Hosoe is obviously the sort of main composer for these, but there's on Moby games certainly there's like another 3 or 4 guys, Etsuo Ishii, Yoshinori Kawamoto, and Thunder Noguchi, which is an incredible name. But like it's always tough trying to figure out who did what in these. Just old credits for old games are messy. We constantly complain about it, and I'm never going to stop complaining about it. And yeah, it's sort of like whether it's deliberate or whether it's just sort of by happenstance, it's very frustrating when you're sort of trying to do some research. I know you've had trouble with this, Brian.
Yeah,
because you mentioned it. Yeah.
Yeah, especially with I mean, at least this one gives you names and it's not just like Namco sound team.
Yeah, that's true. Like, yeah. So, so the PC Engine version of the versions that I played, this is probably the one I like the most. So I pulled out my old Core Graphics Mini because I remember that it had this version on it, and I just played it for a bit. And the fact that the TurboGrafx controller has auto fire built into it, at least on the version that came with my Core Graphics, that made playing the game a lot easier.
Oh, absolutely.
I bet. Like,
yeah, because it's one of those games where basically you will fire as fast as you can hit the button. There's no sort of cooldown. So like I didn't turn it up to max, but certainly even being able to just put it on the first tick and just letting it go while you played just made things a little bit easier.
Just fly back and forth and kill everything on the screen.
Yeah.
Every single 1cc playthrough I watched was played on an emulator with auto fire turned on. Nobody was having that single push of the button because it does.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder to go through it because you have to your bullets are quite small and quite dinky unless you're upgraded, and so it just makes it infinitely easier, like you said.
Yeah. Um, and yeah, I do like this soundtrack a lot. So the first track we opened with was from the TurboGrafx 16 version, to be clear on that. But yeah, it's definitely sort of inferior in terms of the sound to the arcade version. Like the TurboGrafx 16 has a great sound chip, but I do think the system is probably better known for its sort of CD soundtracks, because it has that very unique sound that CD soundtracks of the time had. And yeah, so this time as well with the track names, we finally have some area names to go with them. I'll probably put it in the notes which areas they are for the first game, or for the first two blocks, just to be sure. But yeah, we'll jump into this next block of tracks anyway, which is the TurboGrafx 16 version. And we've got first track is Volcano, which is area 2, Jungle, which is area 3, Graveyard, which is area 4, Glacier Land, which is area 6, Dark Castle 1, which is area 7. Then we have Boss C, Boss D, and Zawell, the last boss. very sort of faithful interpretations, but I do think they lose a little bit in them. I'm not quite sure what it is. I'm not sure is it sort of down to the arrangements or just how they're done. But yeah, they're as I say quite faithful to it, and they don't sound bad. Like the TurboGrafx 16 sound chip is very good at sort of approximating stuff similar to arcade sounds at the time. But yeah, there's definitely something missing, even though, as I say, the compositions remain excellent. You cannot fault them.
Yeah, I think that there is. It's tough to. It's tough to argue with the arcade, right? And this adheres so closely to it.
Mhm.
It's the port that that can be as close to it as possible. But even
Yeah.
stuff like the the Ice World Area 6 track, I was very charmed by the arrangement in there, and I thought that there was like, with through the limitations of the TurboGrafx 16, I almost like that particular one just a little bit more. Like I thought it had a little
Mhm.
bit more interesting stuff going for it. But the TurboGrafx 16 is probably the one I have the least to say about, just because it's just
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's the best port version of it. And I know
Yeah.
that we have been throwing slight shade at the Nintendo version, but to me, it's either the arcade version or the Nintendo version. The Nintendo version is the prime port because it's certainly less. It's certainly got a Nintendo thing going on, but I like the Nintendo thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'd much rather play that than the TurboGrafx 16 version. If I was going to play the TurboGrafx 16 version, I'm just going to fire up my arcade emulator, unless I don't feel like dealing with the vertical screen, which is valid.
That's fair enough. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely the one that's closest graphically as well. But yeah, it's the NES version really has its like the way the tiling is and like just all the sprites and stuff is very it feels so much like an NES game. It's a really good port in that it plays to the strengths of the system. And yeah, I suppose we'll probably talk about that now because we've mentioned it a few times in passing. But just the fact that this is both a port and like a sequel to the first game and has some mechanical differences. So if you could sort of expand on that for us, Brian.
So narratively, I mean, as much as people care about the narrative in a shooter, which I guess the creators cared a lot since they put all this work into it, but
Yeah.
it's the same game as far as the stages and the music and everything, but narratively it takes place years later. And so that beginning stage, it has an exclusive beginning stage, which is the ending to the previous game, I believe. And you play as the previous main character who, depending on your translation, he's called like 3 or 4 different things. Like I've seen him called Amaru or Amul or Amru. I don't know.
Yeah.
But so you play as him and you go through there, and if you beat that boss in that opening area, you proceed through the game as that character, as the blue dragon, and you're fighting the bad guy came back type thing. But if you die, it gives you a different story scene where you're that character's son, Prince Lace, I want to say something like that.
Yeah.
And you play as them instead, and they're a gold dragon who is faster. I think they do more damage and have more health, and it also takes a few of the levels out of the game, like the harder ones. It makes it shorter.
Oh,
so
okay.
it's like a built-in difficulty selection. I mean, that you don't manually select. It's just easier if you die in the first level. But
Yeah.
it's
That
weird.
first level is incredibly fucking easy.
It is. I
which
wonder how many people like it's. I don't know. I didn't know that because, like I said, I didn't have an instruction manual when I first had this game. But
Yeah.
I wonder how many people might have played this and not realize that's what was going on. If
I
they
was
died
very
or didn't
confused,
die.
certainly, when I was playing it. I was like, I died in the first level, and then it kicked me back to the title screen. And then I was like, okay, I guess I'll continue playing, and then it booted me into the first level from the game.
Yeah,
and I was like, what the fuck just happened?
Weird. And like I said, they have they included a narrative for that, which seems like going above and beyond to me. Like they could have just, and also like the game technically has a different title. Like on the NES, it's the Dragon Spirit: The New Legend, which again it's treated like a sequel, even though I don't know if you care about the canonicity of it, but you know, then there's an actual sequel later on, the Dragon Saber.
Yeah. It's an interesting idea. I think you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you go to the title screen no matter whether you win or lose that first level.
Okay.
And then you kind of continue, and this is further on. And I feel like, you know, I think it's a stretch calling it a sequel for real. They're just sort of like, you know, shrunk down versions of the levels before. But it's like different placement, different you know, the power-ups feel a little different. It's certainly like, you know, I think it's easier than the harder stages are easier than in the arcade version.
One of the big reasons is you know, anybody who's played older games, especially ports, will be familiar with, you know, good old like slowdown.
Yeah.
And this game has it, you know, when there'll be enough enemies, and once you've played through a level a couple of times, you know where that slowdown is going to be, and you can take advantage of it to kill more, to dodge things and kill more things. And there's also, you know, sprite flickering and other things that you would only get on the you know, less powerful systems.
Yeah. And that's always funny in old games because it's something that's now sort of built into a lot of shooters. The sort of slow down to give you a bit of time to react to things. But it was just something that was due to hardware limitations on the old on the older systems. But yeah, we'll jump into some music from the NES game. So the NES game, the arrangements were done by Masakatsu Maekawa. Couldn't find a lot about him. He's done like a bunch of Super Power League games and some other sports games for the Super Nintendo, a Jackie Chan game that I can see, and just a couple of other random games that I think were primarily released in Japan. So not a lot about him, but I do really like these compositions. I do think they take advantage of the NES hardware quite well, and they're sort of a good interpretation. Some of them sound a little bit different, I think, than the originals, but it's a cool little comparison, I think. And then I have one more track that we added in just at the last minute because I'd only discovered it existed while we were recording. Was we're going to listen to Area 1 again, but from the Super Smash Brothers Ultimate soundtrack, and that one is arranged by Maki Kirioka.
I'm excited to listen to that one.
Yeah, I am too, because I haven't heard it before. So this is probably going to be the first time I've come to an episode having not listened to a track. So yeah, let's we'll jump into
live
those
podcaster reaction.
live oh god, yeah. So yeah, we've got Area 0, which is the prologue stage that we've mentioned before, that sort of selects your difficulty. Then we have Area 2, Volcano, Area 3, Jungle, Area 4, Graveyard, Area 5, Cave Road, Area 6, Glacier Land. Then we have the boss theme, the final boss theme, and Area 1 from Smash Brothers Ultimate. Big shout out to the Smash Ultimate soundtrack there.
That
That
fucking
was-
ripped. Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
adding that to my playlists.
Yeah,
The-
it's oh, go
The
ahead.
Smash
Sorry.
soundtrack, the Smash Brothers Ultimate, as somebody who does not enjoy competitive Smash in the least,
Yeah,
is a great game. Just for the museum quality to it.
Mhm,
Just
yeah.
having all the little unlocks and all the variants of the track and tracks and stuff like that it's wonderful. I loved that Smash Brothers track, and I don't want to detract from the Nintendo version too much, but
Yeah.
it felt like such a celebratory remix. It was just be like, all right, this is for all the dragons, the dragon heads out there, all the Dragon Spear lovers.
Absolutely.
That's a feeling you get a lot, I think, with the Ultimate soundtrack, that they got people in to to really give it their own, and like it, you can tell everybody's having such a good time with this. But the composer I mentioned, Maki Kirioka. So I was having a look through her history there, and she's worked on a bunch of games that have soundtracks that I absolutely adore. Metal Gear Solid, obviously, being the biggest one, and Zone of the Enders. But there's Tokimeki Memorial, which has got incredible music. She's working with Konami. She's done Beatmania and Bamani stuff. Another great one is Luminous Arc 3, which is a Nintendo DS strategy game, sort of like a Final Fantasy Tactics kind of thing. And all three of those have really, really excellent soundtracks. But yeah, I don't want to sort of again detract too much from the NES version, because Brian was saying maybe a little bit disparagingly, or to not set things up too much, that the NES version wasn't as good. But I think that's something I have to disagree with.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like, even back in the day, I would sometimes listen to MIDI versions of high quality MP3s, because I just like the lower quality samples and stuff. I think it's like that. It's just if it sounds good, it sounds good.
Yeah. No, like I mentioned beforehand, I think it does a really good job of representing what that soundtrack should sound like on the different hardware, and it brings in sort of all the important elements for the most part, and is able to keep the feel without without compromising too much. Yeah, given the sound hardware being a lot less robust.
Yeah, a little bit. I haven't heard. I don't know if you listened to it at all, but I assume the X68000 stuff just sounds like the arcade stuff.
I would have to assume it sounds fairly close to it, because it's got similar sound hardware as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, that's what I was. But no, yeah, I really like the like I said before, the NES is my favorite soundtrack.
Yeah.
I would probably go back and play the NES version again before I booted up my arcade emulator. There's just something to it that I feel it's a great NES game, and I don't think it's necessarily overshadowed by the arcade game, but it's clearly the NES port. There's a different fidelity involved. But I think it sounds great. I think that it is an incredible adaptation of the original arcade. It sounds similar, but it's recomposed, redesigned for the NES sound hardware, and it sounds like something you could put on with a lot of the other sort of underrated NES music. Because we only play the hits. There's a lot of really grating music on the NES. I've been watching Jeff Gerstmann play through. He's doing a weekly series where he's ranking every NES game that was ever released in America, and so it's kind of like a fun jaunt through history. And Jeff Gerstmann knows a lot about he was he's been in the industry for a long time, so it's fun to listen to it. But you listen to that and you can just see him wince the second he turns on some of those unlicensed Tengen games and stuff.
Yeah.
And you're just like, And so, like, it's not a given that it would just sound kind of like stripped down Dragon Spirit. There was some love put into it here, and I think it's great.
Excellent.
Yeah, I agree. Like they didn't. What am I trying to say here? They didn't try to squeeze everything into it, and I think that's for the music to benefit, because it would sound, awful if they tried to squeeze all that those different layers and different instruments in. So rather, they just concentrated on the core identity of each composition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I think that's important to sort of, especially back in the days when every sound hardware was so different. If you ever came across like a soundtrack where it was clear that somebody just tried to stuff the whole thing into a different sound hardware and it just didn't work, that can be very, very grating for a lot of stuff. So it's always nice when you get a game that has a lot of different versions where it's obvious people tried to make the hardware work for it as much as possible. So yeah, I think we'll finish up with that. Brian, have you got anything you'd like to plug?
Not currently. My podcast is on hiatus until I can convince my co-host to record something.
But that's what they said about you the last time. So I mean, I think that's
now it's on them though, because I've been trying, but it's hopefully with the holidays over and stuff, we can get some stuff done. But other than that, I don't really have much currently. You can check out my Blue Sky and all that stuff. It's all my handles are the same. It's Brian, like with an I, C nerd, all one word. So I post stuff from time to time, or I sometimes scan old video game stuff and archive it and post it. But
you posted some scans in here of some cool artwork for this game. I think I might post them up along with this if you're okay with it.
Yeah, that's fine. I can send you the links to the whole things if you want.
Oh yeah, sweet.
But
awesome, I'll put a link into the show notes anyway. Sorry, Reese.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian's a pretty fun follow. Just every couple days posts some cool little video gamer nerd thing.
Yeah, or what Sonic the Hedgehog toy I bought, but
most importantly,
it's very important to buy Sonic the Hedgehog toys. So yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was great.
Absolutely. Reese, what have you got going on?
Just look at the link tree if you care. Yeah. I don't feel like going through it today.
100%, yeah. And as for ourselves, we can be found on Patreon, the CRT Sound System. You can get episodes there at a higher bit rate, and there's some bonus episodes up there as well. And just with the reminder again, you can find the Patreon feed on Spotify. All the bonus episodes are available to listen to there, regardless of whether you subscribe or not to the Patreon. So they're free on Spotify. It's a little bit easier, I think, going there than trying to deal with Patreon's interface for the free episodes. And yeah, you can join us on Discord. There's a link in the notes. You can follow us on Blue Sky as well at CRT Sound System, and we have a Linktree CRT Sound System for any of our other links. And come on the show if you want to come.
Yeah, that's it. We've got to listen. We're not doing the Undertale episode unless you make it happen. That's what I always like to say.
Absolutely. Yeah. And any other episode that you think, why haven't they done this yet? It's because you haven't asked us.
I don't know if we would have gotten around to Dragon Spirit if not for Brian here.
I think it was literally 2023 when you first brought it up to me. To be like, I want to do Dragon Spirit on the show, and I was like, cool, yeah, we'll get around to it. And it took me a while to fit it in.
Y'all done some really cool episodes. When I see y'all post, a lot of times I'm like, oh, I didn't. Y'all cover a lot of stuff that I don't see other people cover for music. So
yeah, I try to do that as much as I can. Yeah. But sometimes it's good to go to the classics as well. So try to strike a balance between the two.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we're going to close out with a rearrangement of Glacierland. So this arrangement was done by Yonemitsu, who's probably best known for doing arrangements on the E soundtracks and a lot of other Falcom stuff. So he sort of became the Falcom star after Yuzo Koshiro left. So like once he was gone, then Ryo Yonemitsu became sort of the main guy, and the sort of the shredding guitar ease soundtrack is probably more attributable to him than anyone else. And appropriately, I think this version of Glacierland very much has that sound to it as well. So yeah, we'll leave you off with that. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Reese.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
Good night.